Hi everyone. So tomorrow night is the holiday of Lag BaOmer. If you're in Israel, you're going to notice children festively lighting bonfires and making, marshmallows and s'mores and maybe singing songs about the Bar Kokhba rebellion. You're going to notice droves of people going to Meron, the gravesite of the famous Talmudic sage Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You're going to notice lots of grumpy people, including myself, closing the windows and taking in their laundry to avoid all that smoke. And you're also going to notice that from this day on, people are going to stop observing the morning rituals that we have observed, during this Omer time from Passover until now, such as not getting haircuts, not shaving, not hearing live music, not getting married, and things like that. Now, if you're new to Torah observance, or even if you aren't, it might kind of take the cake as one of the stranger Jewish practices. Lag BaOmer doesn't appear anywhere in the Torah. If you look for a hint for it in the prophets, you're going to walk away disappointed. And even in the writing of the sages, it's like mentioned, but not in any way that really resembles the modern practice of Lag BaOmer. And you really only see this developing later on. So what is this day all about? When we look at the sources, we might find ourselves with more questions than answers. If we go back to the ancient texts, there seem to be three contexts for this holiday. So first, and probably the most famous reference, is in the Babylonian Talmud. In the Tractate of Yevamot, we learn that about the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was probably the greatest sage, surely in his generation, maybe ever. And although he only began to study at the age of 40, he was arguably, really like the greatest scholar. Now, we're taught in the Tractate of Yevamot that the students of Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and they died between Passover and Shavuot. And it says in the Talmud that they died in some kind of plague because they were not respectful to one another. Now, there's a question if what they actually died from, because the Talmud says that it was a plague, like an illness. Some have argued that maybe it's hinting to the fact that they actually died in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which we'll get to in a moment. Sometimes the Talmud had to censor itself so as to not create suspicion to the Jews. There was a fear that, of anti-Semitism, so maybe Jews wanted to kind of quiet down their, the stories of the courage and rebellion against the Romans. But either way, we have this idea that the students of Rabbi Akiva died on these days. So that's the conventional explanation for why we don't shave or get haircuts or get married or listen to music during the counting of the Omer. But we also know that all of that mourning and sadness stops, according to most, on Lag BaOmer. So there's an oral tradition written down by the sages in the Middle Ages after the Talmud that this is because on Lag BaOmer the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. So that's reason, kind of direction number one. The second sort of direction given for why we celebrate Lag BaOmer is maybe a little bit connected to that source, and that it's this idea that this is a day that symbolizes Jewish rebellions against the Romans. There's not a whole lot of historical evidence exactly why it's Lag BaOmer. This was something that was very much emphasized though by early Zionism. Perhaps it's because, as I said before, maybe Rabbi Akiva's students died in the rebellion. There's also some evidence from Josephus that the previous rebellion, the Great Rebellion that led to the destruction of the temple, happened around this time of year. Some people have said that, the idea of lighting bonfires was how people used to signal the beginning of the rebellion for one another. There was also an ancient tradition of children doing archery games on Lag BaOmer. So some people believe that this is because the rebellion was had either a successful battle or maybe began on Lag BaOmer. The third direction has to do with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The great sage Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva, was considered the greatest Jewish mystic who passed down the mystical tradition. And there's a tradition in the Zohar, the greatest mystical writing, that Rabbi Shimon died on Lag BaOmer. So here's the thing. All of these could be an explanation for why it's a meaningful time, but none of those explanations seem to tell us why it's a happy time, or at the very least a time that we stop mourning. If you look at all of those reasons, they don't seem very happy. What does it even mean that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying? A plague of deaths ended because they were all dead. We know from other sources that Rabbi Akiva's students totaled 24,000, and what Rabbi Akiva put into getting those students, we're told that he left his wife for 24 years to teach all those students. Just think about your average Ivy League college in America is, 20-something thousand students. In Hebrew University in Israel, that has 6 campuses, there are 23,500 students. I Googled that today, right? Imagine if all of the doctors, all the medical students and all the law students and all the social work students, all the psychology students, everybody was just studying Torah. And that's what the loss was. And then think about the rebellion. Both the Great Rebellion before the destruction of the temple and the Bar Kokhba rebellion after that ended in tremendous tragedy, the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish community. Why would we want to celebrate that? And if it's the third reason, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died on that day, is that a reason to celebrate? We lost the greatest Jewish mystic? Like, you could literally take all of these explanations and use them as a perfectly reasonable description of why we would have traditions of mourning, not as reasons for stopping mourning. They don't seem happy at all. This seems absolutely nuts. But when you look a little closer, I think you can learn something really deep from the kind of, meeting of all of these different reasons that have been brought for this special day. Let's start with Rabbi Akiva. What we learn in the Talmud is that there was a serious chance that all of Torah would be forgotten. But then, after all of his students died, Rabbi Akiva started a new yeshiva, and what we're taught in the Talmud is that he only had five students that essentially carried on the Torah as like the leaders of the oral tradition for the next 2,000 years. His students were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Elazar, and it says that they alone continued the Torah. We learn that if you read like a random Mishnah that's not attributed to anyone, which is most of the Mishnahs, you should attribute it to Rabbi Meir, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva. We're taught that the Midrash is to be attributed to those students of Rabbi Akiva. If you read a mystical work, it's attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a student of Rabbi Akiva. So to understand the magnitude of who Rabbi Akiva was and what he did and what his students did was that basically through the funnel of Rabbi Akiva and his five students, all of the world of Torah essentially was reborn. And then let's look at the rebellion. It's true that the rebellions ended in disaster physically, but imagine a world where we hadn't rebelled. Let's say we hadn't rebelled against the Romans. It's not so hard to imagine what our fate would have been because we can look at all the other places that were conquered by Romans and didn't rebel. The Jews never gave in. With the last bit of strength that we had, we rebelled and the temple was destroyed and we rebelled again and we lost again. But the spirit was that the whole world can be Roman. Everyone can say that the world is one way, that this is truth, but a Jew wouldn't bow. It's the Maccabee spirit. It never died. It was that spirit that although we were physically crushed, we were sustained for 2,000 years of exile. It's that spirit that allowed us to survive. And then look at Rabbi Shimon. Yes, Rabbi Shimon died that day. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died that day. But the mystical tradition teaches that at his bed, while he was dying, he shared the secrets of the mystical Torah. And it says that his bed was actually consumed with fire. There's like a thread going through all these stories. If you put together all the reasons for Lag BaOmer, they all concentrated in one period of time. That time at the end of the temple, but the beginning of like a new type of Torah, a new type of Judaism. Like everything was destroyed and everything starting over. The world of Torah was destroyed. Like when you think about the sheer amount of Torah that could have been learned from 24,000 scholars just going around Israel and teaching Torah, it was all destroyed. But what did we get? We got a whole new way of learning. Because before that, the oral Torah had been an oral tradition being passed down. But because of the death of all of these students, there was an actual fear that the oral tradition would be lost. And then for the first time, the oral tradition was written down. We got the Mishnah, we got the Talmud. It became accessible, ironically, to more people than ever. We're still studying these texts. So while look at the rebellions, our physical destruction, our physical nation and temple were destroyed, right? But the fighting spirit was like immortalized. That would, that spirit that would allow us to rebirth with the reestablishment of the state of Israel after 2,000 years. And it's the day we lost Rabbi Shimon, but we gained the revelation of mystical, secrets that would sustain us for 2,000 years of exile spiritually. So maybe that's the secret of Lag BaOmer. And of the Jewish people as a whole, maybe that ability to see Lag BaOmer as although it looks like a sad day, to see it as a day of the end of mourning, it's like we don't deny the sadness. We don't say these are happy days. We say these are the end of mourning. We say like we recognize the sadness, we mourn, but we also stop mourning. The Jewish people are special because we stop mourning. Like Rabbi Akiva, he saw his entire work crumble. It would have been so easy for him to despair and say like, okay, this whole thing isn't working. And how easy would it have been for the Jews to, after the first rebellion was crushed, to just say, whatever, enough. Let's just get along with our Roman occupiers. But they didn't. Rabbi Shimon had to hide in a cave for years and years because he spoke out against the Romans. Like he could have just said, enough, why do we have to keep fighting? But he didn't. And it's like all of those things unite the reasons that we have for Lag BaOmer. My son Akiva, I love his school. And they're studying now the subject of how to keep your faith in Hashem in the face of tragedy. And so the kids were asked to go interview somebody who kept their faith in the face of a horrible thing. And so our son Akiva decided to interview Rina Ariel, whose daughter Hallel was killed by a terrorist in her bed. And he asked her, how did you must have had a crisis of faith. How did you overcome that? And she goes, why do you think I had a crisis of faith? She said, I had a crisis and I have had faith. I didn't have a crisis of faith. I had a crisis with faith. And then she went on to tell our son how, all of what, everything that she does and everything her husband does to commemorate Hallel, creating love, fostering love of the land and love of the Temple Mount. And, she was like encapsulating that spirit. That's the spirit that's sustained us throughout 2,000 years of exile. And I think there's another thing here. The Rabbi Akiva dusted off the world of Torah, dusted off that tragedy, and created the world of Torah from 5 students. He didn't try to make a huge yeshiva again. He had 24,000 students. But look carefully at what the Talmud says. He says they didn't treat each other properly. That's why they died. Now that's so strange of all reasons, because we know that Rabbi Akiva always emphasized teaching, love your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself. He taught so many students, but they didn't really get the main idea, the message. And then he taught 5 students, but what students? In a whole world of darkness, 5 people really got it, and they taught the entire world. Rabbi Shimon, one person, taught the entire mystical tradition that eventually, sustained us for 2,000 years. And we live in a world where quantity is so often, taken as proof of something being right. Like, follow the experts, we're told. Look how many countries condemn Israel, we're told. In the time of the, before the Holocaust, Zionists like Jabotinsky warned that a disaster was coming, but they were a minority, and the majority wanted to stay in Europe and didn't believe him. Didn't believe the Zionists that this, disaster was coming. A lot of people here, even in our own fellowship, probably have an opinion or a way of, seeing things that's different from people in their community or even their own family. And people say, look at everybody else. You're the one who's figured it out. And it's like Rabbi Akiva tells us that Torah is not always discovered by following the majority, but sometimes it's by a few that are willing to be loyal to that which they know to be true. And from them springs forth a transformation, a greater understanding. And so maybe this holiday is also a tribute to those few who don't follow the crowd, but are willing to be a small voice of truth that reverberate, great courage. In Devarim 7:7, it says that Hashem chose us, not because you are more numerous than any people did the Lord delight in you and choose you, for you are the least of all the people. Like it says that Moshe tells us Hashem did not choose us because we are the majority and we have the majority opinion that everybody listens to and that's really popular. No, he says you're the least. You're the fewest. You're the quiet, small voice. But because you and your forefathers followed me, that is why Hashem loves us, right? That's why I love you, Hashem tells us. And so perhaps, this holiday is a tribute to that spirit that's willing to be a small voice that speaks the truth no matter what everybody else thinks. That voice that's, that small group that's willing to say no matter what happens, we dust ourselves off, we get back up, and we keep on fighting, we keep on going. That is the spirit. And it's an interesting thing. Most holidays, we kind of look at them as having a diminishing value. Like if you look at Pesach, Passover, how we celebrate it today is nice, but it's so diminished compared to how our forefathers celebrated it with the temple and the Pesach offering, and there was so much more. Think about our forefathers celebrating Shavuot. They didn't just have prayer in the synagogue or in their homes, but they were able to bring the bikurim, bring the first fruits to the temple. Like everything seems so much richer, and today it's like just a shadow of what used to be. But Lag BaOmer is a really interesting holiday because it seems like a holiday that every year is getting stronger and stronger. Like when I was growing up, Lag BaOmer was like hardly a big deal, hardly a thing. And like with every year that goes by, you hear of more and more Lag BaOmer celebrations. More people are like looking into this and studying it and talking about it. It's a holiday that, really developed so much more recently, and it's become so much richer than it ever was in the past. And maybe that's a sign that that spirit of Lag BaOmer and everything Lag BaOmer represents is getting stronger and stronger with the return from the exile and the reestablishment of Israel. Like that spirit of rising up from the dust, that spirit of coming from the destruction of the Holocaust to creating the state of Israel, that spirit is awakening and getting stronger and stronger every day. So with that, I wish you guys a happy and meaningful Lag BaOmer. Bye, everyone.